This is 6.1, rational exponents and exponent properties. This is part 2 of the video, so if you haven't watched part 1, go back and watch part 1. So the second part is talking specifically about rational exponents. And again, rational is typically referring to like a fraction. So what if you have a fractional exponent? Well, the base understanding, a general understanding of this right here, a or some base to the 1/nth power. So again, so whatever that exponent is, this is how you would write it as a root. So I want you to pay attention. The denominator of the fractional exponent is actually the root. Okay, so whatever root we're talking about, that's actually the denominator of the fraction. So just as a quick reminder, okay, what are roots, just to make sure you understand? Like most of us are familiar with square roots, and square root, the reason why it's called a square root, and oftentimes we don't even write that 2, we just normally write like the square root of 9, but it's called a square root because there's a 2 right there. And the reason why the square root of 9 equals 3 is because 3 squared is 9. That's why the square root of 9 is 3. And the cube root of something, well, this is pronounced the cube root of 8. And the reason why the answer is 2 is because 2 cubed is 8. Remember, 2 cubed means 2 times 2 times 2, and that's 8. And the same thing with the fourth root, 3 to the 4th is 81. Again, 3 times 3 times 3 times 3 is 81. And the same thing with 2 to the 5th is 32. This is pronounced the 5th root of 32. And again, the reason why it's 2 is because 2 to the 5th is 32. So 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 is 32. And this continues on and on. So that's just to remind you what a root is. So let's look at some examples. So if I had the base is x, so notice it's being raised to the 1/2 power. And again, there's no way to plug this into a calculator because we don't know what the value of x is. So we're just practicing how to write this as a root and how to write a fractional exponent as a root. Well, notice it's to the first power, so x to the first power, and the denominator is the root. Okay, that's what I said here. The denominator is the root. And so this is actually the square root of x. That's really what this is. You can just write it as the square root of x. So x to the 1/2 power is literally the same thing as the square root of x. So x to the 1/3, again, notice the denominator is a 3, so that's the root. So this is a cube root of x. And again, it's just x because it's x to the first power. This next one, again, the denominator is the root. So it's, x to the 1/4 power is the same thing as the 4th root of x. And just as a side note, make sure you write it as a tiny 4th root. Don't write 4, square. That looks like 4 times. So make sure you're writing a tiny. It's like an exponent, but it's the root of the x. Okay, so just the correct way to write it when you write these. All right, so that's how that's what a fractional or rational exponent is. Let's practice how to write this. Make sure we understand. So this is the type of question I would want you to know how to do. So write each radical using rational exponents. So can you write this as, notice these are all radical forms. These all have radicals, square roots, cube roots, 4th roots. I can ask you 5th roots, 6th roots, whatever it is. And now I want you to write it as a rational exponent. Again, I'm not asking you to plug it into your calculator. I'm not looking for a decimal answer. I'm not looking for a big number. I want you to write it as a rational exponent. So here, again, the base is 7. The base does not change. Notice it's to the first power, and notice this is a square root. And so remember, the root is the same as the denominator. So the square root of 7 is the same thing as 7 to the 1/2 power. The 15, the base doesn't change. And again, this is a square root, so that's the denominator. And notice it's to the first power. So 15 to the 1/2 power is what I'm asking you to write it. This next one, the base is 6. The base doesn't change. Notice it's to the 4th power. And the root this is a cube root. And so the root is the denominator. So 6 to the 4/3 power is the same thing as the cube root of 6 to the 4th power. Let's go look at this next one. The base is 2. It doesn't change. It's being raised to the 3rd power. And notice the root is the denominator. Now on this particular problem, notice 3 divided by 3 is actually 1. So I would want you to simplify that all the way to 2. So notice if you ever have a cube root of a cube power, they actually kind of just cancel each other out. You know, a 4th root, like this next one, the 4th root of 4th power, they're actually going to cross each other out. So the base doesn't change. It's to the 4th power. The root is the denominator. And so this is the same thing as 2 to the 1st, which is 2. Again, if you have a root and a power of the same number, they're actually going to cross each other out. All right, so here the base is 8. It's being raised to the 3rd power, and notice the root is a 2. Again, if it's not written, it's automatically a 2. This is a square root, so that would be the denominator. Again, the base doesn't change. It's to the 4th power. The root is the denominator. So 5 to the 4/3 power is what I'm looking for to write it. Now let's practice it the other way. Now let's take rational exponents or fractional exponents and let's write it in radical form. So I want you to write it with a radical on each of these. You know, radical. So notice the base doesn't change. It's to the 1st power and the denominator is the root. So again, that's just the cube root of 2. That's really what I'm looking for. So the cube root of 2 is the same as 2 to the 1/3 power. The base doesn't change. That's the base. It's to the 1st power, and the denominator is the root. So again, this is the 5th root of 6, and that's the same thing as 6 to the 1/5 power. Here, the base is x. It doesn't change. It's being raised to the 2nd power. The denominator is the root. So this is the correct way to write that expression. The base doesn't change. It's being raised to the 5th power, and the denominator is the root. Now, let's actually practice how to evaluate each of these using our calculator. And again, there is a way to do these without a calculator, but it would take some time to go into the explanation of this. So, you know, if you don't have a calculator for this, then you need to first find out how to evaluate square roots to decimals, and then you just make it to the whatever power that is. So right here, there's 2 ways to do this. What you could do is write this. If you just want to plug that into the calculator, 2 to the square root of 2 to the 7th power, and you can. There's another way to do this. You could write this as exponent form as well. So this is 2 to the 7th power, but notice the root is a 2 because this is the square root, so the denominator is 2. So what we want to do is, you can plug this in either way. So I'm going to plug it in both through my calculator. I'm going to show you it's the same thing. So if you prefer just to plug in this to your calculator, you can, or you can actually plug this into the calculator. You can. I actually think it's easier to plug this in instead of using the root. Okay, so either way. So let's go over to the calculator and look at this. So let's first plug in the square root, and the square root button is, if you look at this right here, the button's right here. Let me clear that out, but the button's right there. But notice it's in blue, so I'm going to use the 2nd and then the x squared button, so I have a square root, and then it's 2 to the 7th power, so push 2, and remember this caret button right above the division, raises it to a certain power, so it's to the 7th power. So literally make sure before you press enter, make sure that it's the exact same problem that you have over on your paper, and so this would be my answer. And I want the decimal to the 3 decimal places, so I would literally write 11.314. All right, so let's practice. How do I type this in? So if I wanted to write it as an exponent as a fraction. So literally 2 and then the caret button, and then you're just going to literally type in 7 divided by 2. And so that should give you the exact same answer as that. By the way, if you're using a TI-83, you would have to type in 2 caret parentheses 7 divided by 2. Make sure you use parentheses if you're using that. If you don't use parentheses, what it's going to do, it's going to take 2 to the 7th power, and then it's going to divide it by 2. And that's not what you're doing. So if you're using an 83, a TI-83, then make sure you put parentheses around a fractional exponent. So let's move on to the next one. Again, you can plug this in exactly the way it looks, or change it to a fractional exponent. So this is literally 3 to the 5th power, and again, the root is the denominator. So again, you can plug in either one of those is fine. Let me show you again one more time how to do it both times on the calculator to make sure you know how to do it. So this is a cube root. Okay, so how do you do a cube root? Well, if you push the math button, you could go down and there's a cube root button right there, and there's also if I ask you, like on the next problem, it's the 5th root. So notice this option right here. There's the cube root. There's that. So I'm going to go ahead and use that just to show you. And you can literally plug in those, those numbers, whatever you want. So I'm going to put a 3 there, and then I'm going to type in 3 right there, and it's raised to the 5th power. So you can literally type in exactly what you want, and that would give you the number. Okay? Or, again, I think it's so much easier just to type that in. So 3 raised to the 5/3 power. So I think it's so much easier to type that in. Instead of going to the math button and trying to find the root and all that. So, it's up to you however you want to type this into your calculator. But again, I'm going to, if it was up to me, I would just do 4 as the base. It's being raised to the 2nd power. This is your denominator. So I would just type in 4 raised to the 2/5 power. And then get my answer. Again, the same thing here. The base is 2. It's being raised to the 3rd power. This is your base. And so that's what I would type in, 2 raised to the 7th power. And I would just get my answer that way. And again, if you wanted to, again, the 7th power, again, if you wanted to do that, you would have to push math, go down to number 5, and then just type in 7 right there, and then type in 2 to the 3rd power. Again, it's going to give you the same answer, but again, I personally think it's quicker to type this in instead of typing all that in. So it's your choice how you want to evaluate these, and then of course rounding to 3 decimal places or whatever the instructions tell you to do. And that's 6.1, how to evaluate fractional exponents and all the properties of exponents.